One day, when Rakesh was 6, he walked home from the Nursery bazaar eating cherries. They were a little sweet, a little sour, small bright red cherries which had come all the way from the Kashmir valley. Here, in the Himalayan foothills where Rakesh lived, there were not many fruit trees. The soil was stony and the dry cold winds stunted the growth of most plants. But on the more sheltered slopes, there were forests of oak and deodar. Rakesh lived with his grandfather on the outskirts of Nursery, just where the forest began. Grandfather was a retired forest ranger. He had a little cottage outside the town. Rakesh was on his way home from school when he bought the cherries. He paid 50 paise for the bunch. It took him about half an hour to walk home, and by the time he reached the cottage, there were only 3 cherries left. "Have a cherry, grandfather," he said as soon as he saw his grandfather in the garden. Grandfather took one cherry, and Rakesh promptly ate the other 2. He kept the last seed in his mouth for some time, rolling it round and round on his tongue until all the tang had gone. Then he placed the seed in the palm of his hand and studied it. "Are cherry seeds lucky?" asked Rakesh. "Of course." "Then I'll keep it." "Nothing is lucky if you put it away. If you want luck, you must put it to some use." "What can I do with the seed?" "Plant it." So Rakesh found a small spade and began to dig up a flower bed. "Hey, not there," said grandfather. "I've sown mustard in that bed. Plant it in that shady corner where it won't be disturbed." Rakesh went to a corner of the garden where the earth was soft and yielding. He did not have to dig. He pressed the seed into the soil with his thumb, and it went right in. Then he had his lunch and ran off to play cricket with his friends and forgot all about the cherry seed. When it was winter in the hills, a cold wind blew down from the snows and went woo, woo, woo in the deodar trees, and the garden was dry and bare. In the evenings, grandfather and Rakesh sat over a charcoal fire, and grandfather told Rakesh stories about people who turned into animals, and ghosts who lived in trees, and beans that jumped, and stones that wept. And in turn Rakesh would read to him from the newspaper, grandfather's eyesight being rather weak. Rakesh found the newspaper very dull, especially after the stories, but grandfather wanted all the news. They knew it was spring when the wild duck flew north again to Siberia. Early in the morning, when he got up to chop wood and light a fire, Rakesh saw the V-shaped formation streaming northwards and heard the call of the birds clearly through the thin mountain air. One morning in the garden, he bent to pick up what he thought was a small twig and found to his surprise that it was well rooted. He stared at it for a moment, then ran to fetch grandfather, calling, "Dada, come and look, the cherry tree has come up." "What cherry tree?" asked grandfather, who had forgotten all about it. "The seed we planted last year. Look, it's come up." Rakesh went down on his haunches, while grandfather bent almost double and peered down at the tiny tree. It was about 4 inches high. "Yes, it's a cherry tree," said grandfather. "You should water it now and then." Rakesh ran indoors and came back with a bucket of water. "Don't drown it," said grandfather. Rakesh gave it a sprinkling and circled it with pebbles. "What are the pebbles for?" asked grandfather. "For privacy," said Rakesh. He looked at the tree every morning, but it did not seem to be growing very fast, so he stopped looking at it, except quickly, out of the corner of his eye. And after a week or 2, when he allowed himself to look at it properly, he found that it had grown at least an inch. That year the monsoon rains came early, and Rakesh plodded to and from school in raincoat and gumboots. Ferns sprang from the trunks of trees. Strange-looking lilies came up in the long grass, and even when it wasn't raining, the trees dripped and mist came curling up the valley. The cherry tree grew quickly in this season. It was about 2 feet high when a goat entered the garden and ate all the leaves. Only the main stem and 2 thin branches remained. "Never mind," said grandfather, seeing that Rakesh was upset. "It will grow again. Cherry trees are tough." Towards the end of the rainy season, new leaves appeared on the tree. Then a woman cutting grass cut the cherry in 2. When grandfather saw what had happened, he went after the woman and scolded her, but the damage could not be repaired. "Maybe it will die now," said Rakesh. "Maybe," said grandfather, but the cherry tree had no intention of dying. By the time summer came round again, it had sent out several new shoots with tender green leaves. Rakesh had grown taller too. He was 8 now, a sturdy boy with curly black hair and deep black eyes. "Blackberry," grandfather called them.